Every man who has ever poured his strength into someone else knows the quiet sting of seeing his actions vanish into thin air, of watching late nights, sacrifices, and small acts of care dissolve without recognition, as if they were owed rather than offered. And it is in that silence where resentment begins to grow, because the human spirit was never built to thrive where it is unseen. The tragedy is that men are often conditioned to believe that if they simply give enough, endure enough, and carry enough weight, eventually gratitude will appear. Yet in reality, what often appears instead is entitlement, and what was once a gesture of love slowly hardens into expectation. The unappreciated man lives in a kind of invisible labor, where his devotion becomes background noise. He buys the gifts, solves the problems, listens when she speaks, adjusts his life to her moods, but instead of increasing her admiration, he notices her attention slipping further away, as though the very abundance of his giving has dulled its impact. This is the paradox. The more effort he expends, the less it seems to matter, and soon he finds himself not cherished but taken for granted. This isn't just a matter of bad manners or casual neglect, it is a psychological pattern. When effort is endless, it loses its weight. When attention is constant, it becomes invisible. Appreciation cannot survive without scarcity, without the sense that what is given has cost something real. And when a man forgets this, he traps himself in a cycle where his worth is measured not by who he is, but by how much he can provide without complaint. At first he tells himself it is love. He says that sacrifice is what proves devotion, that patience is what secures her loyalty. But as the months pass, he feels his energy drain and his identity erode, because no matter how much he does, it never seems enough. He becomes not a partner but a servant, not admired but tolerated, and the distance between them widens even as his effort increases. It is in this unspoken struggle that many men lose themselves, not because they were weak, but because they confused generosity with obligation, and believed that their value would shine through sheer persistence. Yet history, philosophy, and psychology all whisper the same warning. When a man's effort is unseen, it is not a foundation for love, but a slow erosion of respect. And unless he wakes up to this truth, he risks building his life on ground that will never hold him. What unsettles a man most is not the absence of effort on his part, but the blindness on hers. The way recognition fades as soon as consistency sets in, and the way something once valued can suddenly appear ordinary when it is always within reach. Human nature has a cruel trick. We adapt quickly to what is reliable, and once adapted, we forget to value it. This is not only true of possessions or comforts, but of people. And the more reliable a man becomes in meeting her needs, the less extraordinary his presence feels to her. Psychologists call this process habituation, the mind's tendency to stop noticing what never fails. It explains why she no longer lights up when he fixes the problem, why she no longer thanks him for sacrifices that once seemed generous, why his steady hand is no longer a source of security but a background constant she barely registers. To her, his devotion becomes like the furniture in the room, useful, even necessary, but unremarkable. In this state, appreciation is not just absent, it is inverted. The very stability he offers becomes the canvas on which her discontent is painted. She feels entitled to it, resents the rare moment it is not provided, and quietly believes he should do more, even though he is already doing everything. This reversal poisons the relationship because respect cannot survive where entitlement grows, and once respect dies, desire soon follows. The tragedy is that many men do not recognize this shift until it is too late. They believe the answer is to give even more, to stretch further, to prove themselves through greater displays of devotion. But the psychology of ingratitude works against them. The more he does, the less it is noticed, and the less it is noticed, the harder he pushes, until he is trapped in a cycle where his effort guarantees his invisibility. At its core, this is not about romance but about perception. A woman who fails to practice gratitude will always take abundance for granted. A man who believes appreciation is automatic will always be shocked when it disappears. And unless he understands the nature of ingratitude, he will keep mistaking her silence for indifference rather than what it truly is, the mind's inability to cherish what it refuses to see. A man can lose years of his life chasing a mirage, convinced that if he just proves himself long enough, love will become unshakable, as if loyalty were a prize waiting at the end of a contest of devotion. And yet this belief is nothing more than a trap that drains his strength while leaving him emptier than before. The fantasy that affection can be secured by effort alone is deeply rooted in the way men are taught to see worth. Work hard, endure, push through, and eventually reward will follow. But the economy of relationships does not function like labor. Love is not earned the way wages are paid, and devotion does not guarantee respect. The harder he tries to win her recognition, the more he steps into a role of dependency. She becomes the judge, he the performer, and with every act of proving, he lowers his own standing. What began as love begins to look like negotiation, where his value must be argued for rather than simply seen. This is why so many men find themselves exhausted, not from lack of love, but from the endless performance of trying to secure it. Philosophers from antiquity to modern times warned against this error. To live seeking another's validation is to live without a self, because identity shaped by someone else's approval is no identity at all. The man who builds his worth on applause discovers that the applause never lasts, and when it fades, so does his confidence. Instead of standing rooted in his own strength, he collapses whenever recognition is withheld. The illusion of earning love blinds him to the truth that attraction, desire, and respect flow toward authenticity, not effort. A man who moves under his own power, who creates, builds, and grows for reasons beyond another's gaze, draws respect without chasing it. But the man who bends his life around her attention soon discovers that the more he tries to hold it, the more it slips away. It is not cruelty that robs him of respect, but confusion. He confuses service with power, sacrifice with magnetism, and effort with permanence. And when he finally realizes that no act of devotion can make someone feel what they do not feel, the illusion cracks. It is in that moment of clarity that a man sees the choice before him: continue proving himself into exhaustion, or step away and reclaim the strength that was his from the beginning. There comes a quiet instant, often unplanned, when the truth cuts through the fog, and it is not born out of anger, but out of exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that no rest can heal, because it comes from giving without return. In that moment, he does not rage or argue. He simply sees. He sees the imbalance. He sees the entitlement. He sees that no amount of sacrifice has drawn her closer. And for the first time, he understands that the problem was never a lack of effort, but the absence of respect. This realization is rarely dramatic. It does not arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It comes in silence, a dinner where his words pass unnoticed, A gesture that once mattered now brushed aside. A look in her eyes that confirms what his heart has been resisting. These small moments of neglect accumulate until one final dismissal makes the pattern undeniable. He recognizes that the life he is living is not love but servitude, and that the more he tries to be enough, the less he is valued. In that flash of clarity, he discovers something unsettling. He has been complicit in his own neglect, by staying, by giving without boundaries, by convincing himself that patience was virtue. He has trained her to see him as expendable, and though the weight of that truth stings, it is also liberating, because once he acknowledges his role, he can also reclaim his power. Every philosophy that speaks to strength warns of this threshold. Epictetus wrote that freedom is found not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. The man who realizes he has been trying to earn what should be freely given, suddenly understands that he has the right to step away. The scales shift, not because she changes, but because he finally does. The moment of realization is not just the end of an illusion, it is the beginning of clarity. He no longer wonders how to fix her perception. He no longer begs for recognition. Instead, he asks himself the only question that matters. If my effort has no worth here, why am I still offering it? And once that question is asked, the path forward becomes unavoidable. He must either betray himself by staying or honor himself by leaving. When the truth finally settles, the choice before a man is not between her love and her indifference. It is between his dignity and his denial. He has tried devotion, persistence, patience, but each path led him deeper into invisibility. Now he must decide: continue bending himself for a recognition that may never come, or straighten his spine and reclaim the respect that cannot survive in her hands. This is where the power shifts. For so long he has sought approval, mistaking her acknowledgement for proof of his value. Yet approval is fragile. It bends with moods, it disappears with distraction, it is given one day and withheld the next. Self-respect, by contrast, does not ask permission. It is a man's internal standard, the quiet conviction that he is enough without applause. And once he chooses it, the ground beneath him changes. Choosing self-respect does not mean he stops caring, nor does it mean he becomes cruel. It means he refuses to negotiate his worth. He no longer explains himself endlessly, no longer justifies his presence, no longer lives as if her gaze were the only mirror of his identity. He recognizes that approval is a gift she may or may not offer, but self-respect is a discipline he must practice daily. The shift is visible. He begins to speak less but with more weight. He invests his energy in pursuits that matter to him, not in tasks designed to buy affection. His boundaries return, and with them comes an authority that cannot be faked. She may notice, she may not, but the change is not for her, it is for him. Philosophers and poets alike have echoed this truth. The man who finds contentment within himself cannot be manipulated by another's silence. By choosing self-respect over approval, he moves from dependence to independence, from needing to be chosen to choosing himself. And in that act, he breaks the cycle that once bound him. The beauty of this choice is that it does not demand dramatic speeches or grand exits. It is quiet, steady, and absolute. He simply stops proving. He stops pleading. He stops measuring his value by how loudly she claps. And when he does, he discovers what he had been missing all along: the strength to walk with dignity, whether she follows or not. When a man finally steps out of the space where his effort was wasted, he does not walk into emptiness. He walks into air that is cleaner, lighter, and free of the weight that once bent his shoulders. What seemed unthinkable when he was clinging now feels inevitable, and in the quiet that follows, he discovers that freedom is not loneliness but the return of his own presence. The energy he once poured into convincing someone of his worth flows back into his own hands, and with it comes a new clarity about who he is and where he is going. Walking away is not simply an escape, it is a declaration. It says, "My value does not depend on being noticed here. My effort deserves a soil where it can grow." This act transforms the man from a seeker of approval into an author of his own direction. And in that shift, the pain of neglect begins to fade, replaced by the steady pulse of self-mastery. What he feared losing, her attention, her recognition, her closeness, is revealed to be far less than what he gains: peace, strength, and the freedom to build without begging. With each step away, he reclaims the time that was spent explaining, the energy that was spent proving, and the dignity that was surrendered in silence. He realizes that his life was never meant to be lived as a performance for another, but as a mission shaped by his own hands. The freedom of walking away also carries a paradoxical power. The moment he no longer chases, he becomes more magnetic. The moment he no longer waits, he moves ahead, and whether she notices or not, it no longer matters, because his compass has shifted from her moods to his purpose. He sees now that respect cannot be demanded, love cannot be purchased, and dignity cannot be borrowed. They must be lived. This is why departure is not defeat. It is the final proof that he has chosen himself. And in choosing himself, he embodies the lesson that every great thinker echoed in different words: a man who honors his own value cannot be diminished by anyone's disregard. He leaves not to hurt her, not to teach her, but to protect the one thing no one else can give him: his self-respect. Respect isn't earned by chasing, and neither is wisdom. If you found value here, don't keep it to yourself. Pass it on. Hit like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next lesson. The reminders you carry shape the man you become,